You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music can mean only one thing. It is Monday. It is time for the Crypto Rundown, the program where we break it all down in the world of Bitcoin and ETH and everything else cooking in the crypto options and derivatives. Going to talk, of course, the options, but the futures, some of the spot, the vol, the volume, all that good stuff, OI, and a whole bunch more. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as, of course, from this network upon which so many of you have been binging. If you're just coming in through the Crypto Rundown, we see a lot of you. Welcome, and we know these are crazy times, and this is kind of the only game in town when it comes to shows talking about the crypto derivative side of the space. But B, you're missing out on a whole heck of a lot of other content over there. So wherever you're listening to this, A, leave a review. We welcome those, of course, helping people continue to discover the show. And B, maybe you should upgrade to the full network. You get shows throughout the week, not just this one, usually multiple shows per day. So maybe you're a little bit confused about some of these options terms we're throwing around, like skew or term structure or volatility, open interest. Any of those terms, if they're not familiar to you, then of course our Options Bootcamp, Options Playbook Radio, and some of our more advanced shows like the Option Block and Volatility Views and TWIFO may be interesting to you over there as well. So make sure you upgrade to the full network wherever you get this fine program. As we head on into our first segment, it is time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trading activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, going to do a Just the Facts, ma'am episode this week. Get you in, get you out, get you on with your trading day. And not a lot lighting up the overall Bitcoin underlying market, at least this week. Kind of another gentle drift up show to show here. Remember, we were at north of the 11,000, right about 11,500 and change level. And this week coming in, we're not quite 200 handles north of that, about 186 or so. So a decent run. Certainly nothing to sneeze at, but it's certainly also not the orders of magnitude and swings you may become used to out there in the Bitcoin space. So a gentle drift up from last show here to this show, at least net show to show out here, which is, of course, our frame of reference here on the Crypto Rundown. That means the 30-day realized, looking back, hasn't really moved a heck of a lot. It's literally unched. It's at about 33%, which is pretty much right where it was on the show this time last week. The implied volatility, remember, 30-day realize is going back 30 days and measuring how much volatility the marketplace has exhibited over the previous month. 30-day implied is the market going forward now and attempting to predict what the vol is going to be out there for the next 30 days. So by definition, that should be higher, right? Because you don't know. You know what the past is. You don't know what the future holds. So you have to build in a little bit of a fudge factor just for that reason alone, which is why you usually see implied higher than the realized, and that's pretty much still the case out there in Bitcoin land, even though that's down a little bit as well. It's about a 50% last show. Now it's come down to about a 48%. So Bitcoin is actually even a little bit less volatile than some of the large mega caps out there. I know for a while there, Apple and some others were in the 50s, if not threatening 60s a little bit there in Apple, which is kind of crazy to say that out loud, that one of the largest names on the planet could have such a high level of implied volatility, yet that's what we saw. And so Bitcoin, by comparison, actually a little bit lighter out there. We'll see if that starts to change as we start seeing some moving and shaking. We are, of course, looking at potentially a volatile season coming up here with, of course, earnings in the U.S., but perhaps more presciently and more pressingly out there, the U.S. election perhaps driving some volatility out there as well. Let's look at the Skew. The Skew has swung quite a bit since our last show. We went from minus 2% on our last show to minus about 10.5%. So a pretty big jump there on the Skew platform. If you're not sure what those numbers mean, A, check out some of our educational programs, or B, go back to the archives of this show where we had the founders of Skew.com on the show, which is where we get a lot of this data from the program, where we break down how to interpret all those numbers in a much more detailed fashion out there. But a pretty big move out there, Skew-wise, since our last show. Remember, we had the folks from Genesis Vol on the show last week, and they like to parse it a little bit differently, which is also interesting and also, worthy of note, breaking down the Skew in, let's say, the front month contract, the first 30 days, which is where a lot of this data comes from, versus going farther out. And that's going to be a little bit different beast. Farther out, as I mentioned, a little bit more biased to the upside, where in the near term, you get a little bit more trading noise built in there, which is interesting. And for a lot of our audience, they like to look at both. So if you like to look at both, maybe check out what the Genesis Vol folks are cooking up over there as well. I do believe their free beta is expiring in about a couple of weeks now. So if you want to get in there, kick the tires over there at Genesis Volatility. Have at it while the getting is good. Let's get on out to the open interest. The getting's pretty good out there as well. We were talking about how September was a pretty decent high for OI across all of the major platforms. Of course, talking DERIBIT, CME, and a bunch of others out there. They hit not quite $2.5 billion, but about $2.25 billion net total notional OI out there. And we're getting pretty close to that again out there. So we're ticking back up pretty much almost at, looks like actually we topped out close to those levels and kind of came off it a little bit again, now starting to grow. But we're pretty much north of that 2 billion total OI barometer out there, which people were looking for. So September numbers back on the board after that big expiration, which is kind of interesting. DERIBIT, still, of course, the big dog at about 1.7 billion of that, a little bit north of 2 billion. Then we've got CME now up to about 300 million, which is pretty much the highest it's been from a overall notional OI perspective. We've never seen a level that high. So CME starting to tick up, even though this week not so much from an overall options perspective. Then we got OKEX, number 3 there at 121 million. Then we got Bit.com coming in at number 4, 105 million, kind of elbowing out Ledger X. They're down there at number 5 with 55 million. And then we got Huobi bringing up the rear at 2 million. We won't even count BAKKT because, of course, they don't really have any OI to speak of out there. Let's look at the big prints over the past week at the big venue, which is DERIBIT, still the big dog. Ironically, we kind of touched on it last week, but we said there was some paper going up during our show last week, and that was pretty much the case because that was the biggest day for the week, our show day last week. About 316 million worth of notional going up on DERIBIT. That's a pretty big day. That's the highest we've seen in some time out there. The other recent high we saw was back on September 24th, before that, with about 262 million. And that's the closest we got to last week. So last week was a pretty near-term high water mark out there on DERIBIT. And we also saw about 190-odd million a couple of times on the 16th last week, so another active day, and about in mid-August, August 17th. So you got to go back a while to find anything that comes even close to what we saw last week. So interesting day out there on the 12th. Let's see what some of the big prints were. And ironically, or perhaps not surprisingly, most of the big prints we saw last week came on that day. On the 12th, we saw some weird numbers, too. 361.4, 462.4. So some interesting fractional trades going up last week. That 361 lot was a paper buying the DEES 9,000 puts. That was, again, on the 12th last week. They went up when Bitcoin was 11,579 for 0.018 Bitcoin. We also saw 462.4 of the DEES 8,000 puts going up at right about the same time and also buying. So maybe paper buying a little bit of a stupid. A stupid, of course, listeners, is instead of a spread where you buy one leg and sell the other, a stupid is buying or selling both. And why are they called stupids? Well, check out some of our other programs on the network to find that out. I'm not a huge fan of them, but it sounds like someone may be up to that here, as they also bought the DEES 8000 puts for 462.4. They did that at pretty much the exact same level when Bitcoin is 11,578, and they did those for 0.0095. So actually, from a premium perspective, they kind of line up nicely with the 1x2. The volume was at 1x2, though. So interesting stuff here, and weird sizes in terms of some of the larger prints we saw out there. But that also speaks to some of the interest we've seen out there in the downside. Coming into today, also a pretty active day out there. Not quite as active as last week, but some decent paper. And interestingly enough, those same contracts kind of leading the dance out there today on DERIBIT. This time is an ALTC, though. So not same strike, different month. The 9,000 puts, almost 1,000 on the tape coming into showtime there. So a pretty active one. Also the ALTC 8,000 puts, again. So those two strikes capturing a little bit of activity out here of late. Not quite as far out as last week, but interesting nonetheless that the 8,000 and 9,000 strikes are kind of dominating the tape out there on DERIBIT as well. Let's look really quickly and see where the OI is lining up on a strike perspective right now across all of the major platforms. And it isn't on those strikes, even though they're pretty active. It is actually the 11,000 and the 12,000 strikes that are pretty much in a dead heat. 13,900 for the 11,000 strike in terms of open contracts, and 13,800 for the 12,000 strike. So that makes a little bit more sense given what we've seen of late. Bitcoin has been trending north, so seeing those dominating the tape doesn't exactly surprise me. The interest, though, on those downside put strikes is still fairly strong. The 9,000 strike has about 12,400 contracts open and hot on its heels with the 10,000 strike, about 12,300. Not much love for the 8,000 strike, only about 9,100 open there. But still, a lot of paper out there, and it's pretty evenly dispersed. If you want to go far upside, let's see. You can go all the way up to the 16,000 strike and get almost 11,000 open interest there as well, about 10,800. That's actually tied with the 13,000 strike, also 10,800. So an interesting smattering of strike OI out here. By no means is it dominated on one strike or in one direction. It's kind of evenly spread, which is interesting and perhaps a little bit surprising out there. Certainly on that big day, it was downside lighting it up, but overall, it's still mostly upside. Let's look at the months here and see where most of the action is. It does seem like our old friend October is charging into the lead now with about 51,000 contracts open. That's a big jump from last week. And we see DEES here. Looks like actually taking a bit of a break. It had about 40-odd thousand contracts open last week. And as of this show, about 37,000. So maybe some of that DEES closing or maybe some of that DEES migrating to other months. Either way, DEES, we said before, crypto loves a quarterly. And yet, tons of love here for October right now. Again, that's the near-term contracts, and maybe not that surprising, but you probably would expect DEES to come on a little bit stronger, and instead it's fading a little bit. Also, March coming on a little bit stronger as well. 28,000 contracts open in March. That's kind of interesting. Maybe some people want to play just beyond the realm and the immediate ripple impact of the election, and they want to get out to March and to say the hell with, DEES or even Jan and anything that might get caught up with election. There's been some supposition, of course, listeners, that the election volatility could roll all the way through to Inauguration Day in January, so maybe that's why March is coming on strong. But either way, March is not that far behind DEES right now, 38,000 to about 28,000 contracts. So interesting things afoot out there. What wasn't that interesting over there was overall CME Bitcoin options volume last week. I mentioned they are a firm number 2 now, about 300 million. So they are at their largest notional OI they ever have had. And yet we saw pretty much the biggest print they had for a while was that print we talked about last week, that funky 4-way vertical. Was the 14,000, 16,000 calls going up against the 18,000 and 20,000 calls. It was a weird one. To say the least out there. And it seemed like that was mostly closing. And outside of that, they haven't had anything really rivaling that this week. So not a lot of paper to really write home about. That was the big day. That was, I think, about 48 million went up, I think, worth the notional that day. Prior to that, their biggest day was 34 million recently, back on the 14th of September. And other than that, it's been kind of light sailing out there. But the OI is, in general, ticking up. So if you're looking for a listed Bitcoin option product that's regulated here in the U.S., maybe that's the big dog you want to look at. On the future side, similar story over there on CME. Kind of light paper out there, about 6,000 on the tape coming into showtime today. And pretty much every day last week was a similar level. The The one blip on the radar there was Monday with about 7,000. Again, that kind of is in line with the action we saw on DERIBIT as well. Monday was an active day. Outside of that, not a heck of a lot. Let's swing on over to our old friend, the BAKKT volume bot, see what he has in store for us this week. And it seems like traded contracts actually ticking up a little bit over there in BAKKT land. Remember, they have that 1-to-1 future, so a little bit easier for folks to wrap their head around as opposed to the 5X contract over there at CME, putting up almost 5,000 contracts, about 49.22. That's up about 27% compared to some recent levels over there. Of course, OI, different story. That's about 12.65 million. That's off 31% in BAKKT land. So, unfortunately, not a lot of paper on the options front at all in BAKKT, and not a ton, at least OI-wise, in BAKKT. The OI trending in the wrong direction. So, tradable contracts, good. Hopefully that's not just closing paper. But interesting to see what's going on in BAKKT. I have to get him on the show one of these days so we can chat with him a little bit and see what's driving or perhaps not driving the tape out there. As we head on into our next segment, it is time to explore the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody, let's do it. Let's kick things off as we are wont to do in this segment, breaking down the top 10 out there in terms of market cap. Remember, take the overall numbers with a big grain of salt. If you wonder why I say that every week, just go do research for coin market capitalization and see some of the, shall we say, dubious things that have gone on to try to inflate some of those numbers over the years. So take the overall market caps with a grain of salt. The rankings, though, I think, as I said before, have a little bit more merit. Number 10, Litecoin at about a little bit north of 3 billion, almost 3.2 billion out there. Number 9, Cardano, 3.4 billion. Number 8, Polkadot, one of the better names out there in the top 10, at about almost 3.5 billion out there. Number 7, Chainlink, dropping down a little bit there. Number 7, 4.2, almost 4.3 billion. Number 6, Binance Coin, a little bit north of 4.3 billion for number 6. Number 5, Bitcoin Cash, also at about 4.6, almost 4.7 billion for number 5. Number 4, our old friend, the former perennial top threer, good old XRP, aka Ripple, now a distant number 4 there with about 11, almost 11.25 billion notional out there. And then we go to number 3, Tether. It's been firmly at number 3 for a while out there, about 15.8 billion. You know what number 2 and number 1 are? Number 2, ETH, at about 43 billion and change. Number 1 with a bullet. Still north of the 200B level. Yep, that's the big dog out there, Bitcoin. In terms of breaking stuff down, let's start with the number 2 dog. Not quite the alpha dog, but maybe the beta of the pack. This is ETH. I know a lot of you out there hope someday ETH takes the big dog crown out there. Not going to be this week. It's down about 6.5 handles from our last show. Last week we were talking about it, almost threatening 390, about 388. This week coming in is about 381.5 or so coming into showtime. So taking a little bit of a break here this week. Let's crunch some of the numbers out there. ETH, obviously, also the most active options market outside of Bitcoin out there. So a little bit of fun to analyze and interpret what's going on out there. Let's start looking back. 30-day realized out there. Down a little bit. It was about almost 70% on the last show, about 69%. Coming in a little bit over the course of the past week, down to about 61%. So remember, as that 30-day frame of reference continues to shift, you're going to see some movement in that number, and obviously coming in a little bit over the course of the past week. Same story on the implied front, not quite as aggressive. It's down from 61% to about 56% this week. So still juicy, still frothy, still a little bit more vol in ETH than there is in Bitcoin. We talked about that before as these two kind of hover around similar vol levels. Which one would you rather buy? Which one would you rather own at a 50 or so percent vol? Would it be Bitcoin or would it be ETH? Interesting how you guys break down on that front. Maybe it might be time for another fun poll on that front here. Let's break down some of the numbers out here. Overall, a pretty light volume week on the ETH options front. The most active day was, you can probably guess it, last show day, last Monday, the 12th, with about 37 million worth of notional. Then we have, going back to the 2nd, was about 32 million before that, and getting into September, we saw about 45 million back on the 21st. So those are some of the more active days we've seen recently. But other than that, not a heck of a lot lighting up the tape out there. Overall, OI, unlike Bitcoin, still has a little bit of a way to go to catch up to the September highs. Getting into the end of September, we saw half a million, I should say half a billion out there in terms of net aggregate OI across the venues. We're not quite there right now, a little bit north of 400 million, about 425 million. So still a bit of a ways to go across the top three venues out there, which is primarily DERIBIT. They're the big dog out there still. Then you got OKEX and then Huobi bringing up a distant third place out there, but still on the tape. So, but it's mostly DERIBIT and a little bit of OKEX out there. So not a lot really lighting up the tape to change things so much in ETH. Maybe we'll see if next week can bring a little bit more action out there. Our old friend XRP also having not exactly the most active of weeks, down a little bit. It was threatening the 26 cent level on our last show, about 25.7, giving some of that ghost back up this week. Down not quite a full cent, but about almost that way. It's at about 24.8 coming into showtime. So again, not a huge movement out there. A lot of you would love to see a vibrant, a strong, a firm options market in XRP, but we need that price to budge a little bit first. When it's trading a fraction of a dollar, the underlying itself is pretty much an option at that point. So you don't really need a huge, vibrant options market. Even though it does exist, you talk to the folks at Drawbridge Lending and a few others who have gone out there to source some liquidity in XRP options. So it can be done. It's just not a big use case when the underlying itself is not even 30 cents. Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV. Interesting. These two kind of trending in different directions. You don't see that too often. Last week, Bitcoin Cash was up almost $10, $9.99 from last show. Bitcoin SV actually taking a break, about off almost $11.50 from last show. Usually those two tend to move in lockstep. As we move into our final segment, it is time to answer your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, let's see what we got here. Let's start with Nils. It's a good one here from Nils with a Z. Maybe he's a nihilist, I don't know, but maybe he's just European and he likes, that's his way of saying zero either way. Nils wants to know, why do the brokers' tools for crypto options all suck? Why do you mince words? Tell us what you really feel there, Nils. But I'm not surprised to hear you say that. You're right. I mean, even today in a lot of the traditional, more established brokerage firms out there, it's still kind of hit or miss when it comes to the options tools on those. If you want to buy Apple options, let's say, on a major brokerage platform, a lot of them would do a much better job than they did, but it still is. There's still some brokers out there that are more, shall we say, traditionally stock-oriented, or maybe some other platforms, and they don't, or products, and they don't really put a lot of weight and effort behind their options offerings. There's some major platforms that I won't say here that you might be surprised to hear, and you say, well, wait a minute, they don't really do a lot with options. And no, they kind of do the bare minimum to keep some of those clients who may be interested in that, but their other activities are really where the lion's share of their action is. So if we're still seeing that on the more quote-unquote traditional brokerage front, it doesn't really surprise me to hear that on the crypto front. And I have played around with some of those myself, and some of these brokers are still pretty new to the game themselves out there. I mean, and the term broker, of course, in the crypto space is also a pretty loose one. They're also functioning as exchanges because they're places to aggregate liquidity, and they're also out there trying to get new customers and clients, so they're functioning as brokers. And they're doing all the other traditional jobs of vendors as well. So the definition of broker is kind of a fast and loose one. So it seems like a lot of them are kind of doing the bare minimum. Most of them don't really offer crypto options yet. So that's probably your first starting point, is to find one that actually allows you to do them. And then, the volume is still probably pretty anemic for a lot of them. So it doesn't make sense for a lot of them to really invest heavily in interesting, stats or analytics or tools. That's why on a show like this, we tend to rely on platforms like Skew.com, for example. They do a great job of breaking all this stuff. A lot of this data we talk about today is available up there completely for free. So if you're interested in these things, like the changes in the skew or the OI or what the risk reversal is going up for out there, the 25 delta call versus 25 delta put, or what the implied versus realized volatility is, that's a great place to go. The folks at Genesis, who were just on the show as well, also have a great platform trying to help you break all that down. So clearly other folks have seen an opening there and are moving to try to fill it. So if you want quality analytics, it's probably best with one of those third-party providers right now. They're doing they're doing the bleeding edge stuff out there. The brokers are kind of just doing the bare minimum table stakes to keep you engaged. So do your analysis probably on a Genesis or on a Skew. Then when it's time to trade, then you have to do it through your broker. I think those platforms are probably working to have some more integrations as well, because obviously the end game for a lot of those platforms is for you to be able to hit trade and then connect directly to your broker out there. So I'm sure we'll see some of those integrations coming along once they move more firmly out of beta. But that's probably where I would hang my hat out there, Nils, and anyone else out there listening to a show like this. You're probably interested in that sort of thing. So I would start with those two platforms. Luckily for you, they're still free. They don't cost you anything. So start doing your analysis. Look at the Skew, look at the implied vol, look at the realized vol, look at the OY, all the things we talk about here on this show. You can get lost for hours in those platforms if you really want to. And that should give you a good starting point, a good frame of reference. You should know, if you're going out there to buy Bitcoin options, for example, where the current vol levels stack up against historical. A simple thing like a volatility cone could tell you a lot. If you're buying volatility that's 3 standard deviations above the historical average, well, maybe you want to think twice about that trade, and vice versa if you're selling it well below the historical average out there. So some basic analysis could go a long way towards helping you decide when and how to trade going forward. So I'm with you. I'm not a huge fan of the current tools available on the major platform, which is why we have some of the third parties here for you guys to sample on the Crypto Rundown. All right, that's going to do it here for this episode of the Crypto Rundown. I think all of you out here are joining me for this Just the Facts, Ma'am episode of the Crypto Rundown. We'll be back, of course, with more hot seat extravaganzas, bringing on movers and shakers from throughout the world of crypto options and derivatives on future shows. Remember, if you like what you hear, keep those reviews coming. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the full network. We will keep you engaged with options content throughout the week, usually multiple times a week. You'll get education, you get analysis, you get unusual activity, you get futures options, you get volatility, you name it. We break it down here on the network and a whole bunch more. So hopefully you like what you hear, and you'll come back for throughout the rest of the week. And of course, we'll see you here next Monday for another episode of the Crypto Rundown.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.